To be here today, especially with my guest, Dave Snell, who everybody should know. He's on our show every other Wednesday and is now starting to pair up with other wonderful people on the show. Kelle Steinecke is here today, but needed to rush off to put out a fire with a client, should be back. And in the meantime, chat's open. We value your comments, and it helps us become more relevant and direct our thoughts to creating some really valuable takeaways you can actually apply and benefit from. The word of the day is communication. Happy to hear what everybody out there in the audience has to say about it. And with that said, I'll turn it over to Dave, and he can really bring you up to date and share his first thoughts on communication. Dave.
Hey, good morning, Don. It's a pleasure to be here as always, and on a unique day, a different day than I'm normally on. So it's a great experience as always. I'm sure it will be. And recently, just been working on keeping up with some clients that I have, gaining new clients. As you've said, I joined yesterday late. Your time with Carl was really focusing on my private security business, with cybersecurity being a big facet of that. But it drives to the question of how do we communicate business? How do we communicate capabilities? How do we communicate to our partners, our spouses or our family? Communication is key to everything that we do, whether we're using our hands, we're using our voice, our face, we're communicating something, our dress. How do we, 5 minutes ago, I was wearing a T-shirt. How would that present to, no offense to you, Donna, I see you're wearing one too, but from a business perspective, if I'm in a meeting, I don't want to go in slovenly, or if I'm expected to wear a suit, how do I communicate what I'm trying to convey? And it's very important. So we're always having to look at what it is we're saying about ourselves, saying to somebody, whether through visual, audio, cues, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to start off on communication, because communication really is focused on how do you relate and how do people relate to you, and through your communication and your projection will make a difference. And at the same time, you want to be comfortable and have everybody around you comfortable. So you wouldn't wear your pajamas to a formal dinner, and you wouldn't wear your formal clothes to bedtime, right? So I think it's really about getting that connection, getting that relationship, because there's that saying, he or she they're so easy to talk to. And on the other extreme, it's like, hey, it doesn't matter what I say. No one's listening. No one's really caring. And it kind of shuts the door on a two-way street. And I think people just have to be conscious. And I think we mentioned this many times, is listening is the primary foundation to talking. Without that, you're just presuming or assuming you may be right, but why take a chance when you can ask some probing questions or start to get the feel? You can also, like Dave says, relate to people's facial expressions, nonverbal clues. Is someone into the conversation? Are they looking away? Are they closing their eyes? Are they bored? How emotional up or down are they? If someone's getting too frantic, that's not a good thing. If someone's kind of like mumbling, that's not a good thing. So there is advantages to understanding the nuance to what people say, how they say, and then once you get pretty good at it, you can explain the question of why did they say that? Everything's really easily understood when someone says something, but it's the why. Why now? Why did they bring that up? What relevance did that have? And sometimes they're really bringing an outside thought into an inside conversation, which is a little confusing or puzzling. And if you have more people around the table, it even has bigger impact. So, when we're talking about any type of strategy, any type of activity, And then I think the other thing is, how do you communicate with yourself? What conversations are you having before you have the big or the real conversation? And can you check yourself to say, is my attitude right? Is my energy level right? Is my friendliness available? We've got our first comment from Carrie, and if it's a comment, it's a joke. Today is a national hole in my bucket day. So, Lisa, I still need help with this stinking bucket. Don't quite understand that one, but I'm sure Carrie will explain it over time.
Carrie's always here with a joke.
Yeah, and I think that's really an important aspect of communication too. Sometimes the best way to start out is with a little bit of humor, little levity, kind of raise the energy level or the consciousness. And most people go into situations with some level of skepticism, cynicism, distrust. How do you disarm those people? How do you take them off the defensive and free them up to really be, an open voice and a good voice? What's your thoughts on all these interactions about communication?
All kinds of stuff that you just covered there. It's just kind of hard to keep up. My first thought when you started talking was communication is a two-way street, and asking the questions. Why did somebody say that? Why did they do that? Why are they making the expressions that they are? And I think we've come to a point in our society where we only look at the very thin layer, deep of what it is someone's trying to communicate to me, and we take things a little bit too personally, or we deflect away from thoughts. We try to just not really connect with somebody. And communication is about connecting, understanding why somebody feels the way they do, or saying the things they do, like you pointed out. And for example, just because somebody has a face that they're making, it doesn't mean that they're being negative to you. So you need to understand and connect deeper, ask the questions. Like, for example, I shift a lot when we're in these meetings. I have back pain. Well, if someone's just looking at my face, it'd be like, wow, he really didn't like that answer. No, I'm shifting because my facial expression reflects maybe some pain I'm having, or a shoulder pain or a neck pain. Asking these questions, maybe not in the most formal, not in the middle of this, but afterwards, going, hey, Dave, Don, what were you thinking there? Why were you making that face? And connecting. And we really don't like to go deeper than we feel comfortable doing. And we need to get uncomfortable sometimes, because that's how you connect.
Mm-hmm.
And I really appreciate when people ask me things. They don't just, oh yeah, that's great, Dave. Oh, that's great. Why did you do something the way you did? Why were you shifting in your chair? Whatever they are, it really brings me into something that they have understood or want to understand about me, or tells me something about them as well. Hey, that's a person who cares.
Mm-hmm.
That's a person who's interested in the subject. Again, like you said, are they looking away? Are they showing disinterest? Well, maybe you can draw them in. As you do a speech or you're in a presentation, you see somebody yawn. Well, hey, Jake, what is your interpretation of the data? Bring them in, and that will engage them. Communication, like I said, it's about connecting. And if we're not going to engage with people, then what's the point of being around?
Absolutely. You make some great points, Dave. And because when you enter a conversation, depending on who you're with, right? If you're with somebody you're with every day, like a golf buddy or your significant other, most of the question marks have been kind of addressed. When you're meeting a new person, it's like a ballet in a way. Is you're making a move, and and they make a move, and sometimes it's better to question something when it becomes a question for you. Now, how you do it, there's a saying: praise in public, criticize in private. So if you have 6 or 7 people around the table, depending on their relationship, you might not want to say, hey, Jim, how come you're not paying attention? right?
Right.
That would be a negative, put somebody on their defense. Usually they would apologize without even getting into it, but they would take it as like, hey, you could have said, is there something that, you'd like to ask a question about? I see you're deep in thought. Or
Right.
something of that manner, but really just saying, I don't understand. Can you help me out with this? And take the responsibility of not knowing instead of already knowing before you have all the facts and figures, because you can't unring a bell. And your impression of somebody will start to uh, support their impression of you. And you can kind of dumb down together or you can rise up. And I think those are essential. And also, there's a power situation in most conversations. If you're talking to your boss, it's a different dynamic than if you're talking to the person supporting you. If you're new to the table, you got to earn your stripes before you can really take over. And also how you respond to something that everybody's aware of that you don't have to make them aware of, because to draw more attention to a negative just creates a bad vibe in the meeting. With that said, let's swing to comments. Carrie tries to explain himself. It's my take on the song Hole in the Bucket with Henry and Lisa. Don't really know the song or Henry and Lisa, but I do understand what you're saying now. So it was great to ask the question and get the answer. Dr. Marilyn's here, wonderful colleague. I've known Marilyn for about 4 years. Done some tremendous things. Great to have you, Marilyn. Harvey, who we all know, part of our collaboration group. Hope to see him later today for our get together. Harvey does the franchise show that follows this show on Tuesdays. Also does a franchise branding show on Thursdays. And really has made so many significant strides in live streaming, promotion, and everything else that, he's somebody who we look up to for direction and insight. Marilyn comes back with, we all need to keep the line of communication open for sure. And I think that's the benefit of LinkedIn, is it gives you a billion possible candidates to have a conversation with. And connections should lead to conversations. My rule of thumb, if I wouldn't talk to somebody after connecting with them, I won't connect with them. Because if you already put the ceiling in place, it's not fair to them, because they may want to have a conversation. You're not helping yourself. You're just creating more time and effort that won't be justified in the benefit. Terrence is here. Terrence is a great guy. Known him for a few years, doing some fantastic things. This is a great opportunity to network with people who are visiting here, because they're all here at the same time, hopefully for the same reasons. And there's already a connection. Plus, when you're communicating, it's always important to have an introduction. It's easier for me to say, hey, Jim, I just talked to Dave Snell. He said you'd be a great guy to connect with, versus, hey, I looked at your profile. I think we'd be a good match. The question in everybody's mind when you ask something is, again, why? Why would you want to connect with me? A lot of times you say, well, I checked your profile. Looks like we're in the Army together. Looks like we went to the same school together. Looks like we love golf. Any of those things said you did a little research. It's not just shooting in the dark and hoping for the best. Dennis is here. Dennis is here almost every day. Agree. Great to ask questions and listen to their feedback. That's why we have 2 ears and only one mouth. And, you're always better off buying more vowels before you solve the puzzle, even if it's just confirmation. Well, is this what you're thinking? Sure. Well, great. Now we understand each other. And when you ask a question, in essence, you're giving permission for someone else to ask a question back. Because you could say, why did you bring that up? Well, why does it matter to you? It could be a question. Or, whatever the answer is, you're creating something. You got to keep this 2-step going. You take a step, they take a step, come back with another step. And there's nothing wrong with compliments if they're sincere. Too many people point out flaws and overlook the real values in somebody, and it's not 100%. Maybe they're 80 good, 20 not so good, but why focus on the 20 when you can focus on 80? And everybody feels good when you're sincere and you compliment them. You don't know what your look is until someone says, "Hey, that's a great hat. Where'd you get it at? I'd love to have one." Pretty soon that hat has more value and importance because a third party, unsolicited, reached out and shared that with you. And over time, you'll say, "Well, what about them?" People feel guilty when they're given something and they don't reciprocate somehow, right? So if you said you had a great hat, you might say, "Well, that belt buckle is amazing. What rodeo did you get it at?" or whatever the case. Dennis comes back with, "Agree, we need to talk the walk." Well, we're fortunate as being verbal gives us an edge over most of the animal kingdom, right? I'd be scared if dogs could talk, Who knows what they come up with. But I think that's the other element, is bringing some fun into the conversation. It's like, even if it's the most serious meeting you're going to have, why not get everybody in a more chill situation? Because what you don't want is people screaming across the table, throwing stuff, or getting up and leaving. And then everybody's sitting there with their mouth open for about 40 seconds and wondering, how do we move from here? And the invitation, you always earn your next invitation based on your last performance. So if someone's there and is doing a great job of paying attention, asking the right questions, acting in a more polite, respectful way, they're going to earn themselves a continuing ticket to that. People are really smart and have some great answers, but are just so difficult, to be with, and I think that's important. So, harmony, being aligned, and, also having something to, take your mind off of certain things, because there's a time when conversations get a little too deep too soon, right?
Yeah, it's a balance. It's a balancing act. You got to figure out if over communicate or under communicate. Where's the right understanding?
Absolutely. And, the thing is, what's good for you is good for people like you.
Yeah.
Things appear offensive to you, they're probably offensive to someone else like you. And why go there? And sometimes conversations cannot be culminated in a first go round. Maybe you'll talk to a real estate agent just to get to know them. You might not give them the listing that day. You might have 3 or 4 others you want to talk to. But who left you with the best feeling is more important, and who got the best deal.
Yeah.
Right? And because whoever they're going to represent you to or for is going to be the same personality, the same verbal hints and tips that people may have. Carrie saying hello to Terrence and to Dennis. Great. It's good to connect like that. So looking back, what was a meeting or a conversation you have that still sticks in your mind?
There's no way to pick a single one. But I was just thinking, I just conveyed this story this morning, was the way we communicate and what we're saying about the other person, about ourselves. I had a master chief, I guess he was a senior chief, very senior enlisted Navy enlisted guy who had not aged particularly well. He smoked multiple packs of cigarettes, drank heavily, morbidly obese, even by non-Navy standards. Did not age well, but he looked at me when this is about 20 years ago now, gosh. And he said, "Gosh, sir, you haven't aged well at all." And I'm like, what is the irony here? And it just kind of set a tone in our relationship. And ironically, it broke the ice. Okay. I knew he was messing with me a little bit. I took it a little like, gosh, what did I do with my body? But okay, we're in the Navy. We're going to just kind of joke around. So we have good opportunities to, you mentioned earlier, I bring that up because you bring up starting with a joke. bring some levity to the environment. And I didn't really know the guy very well yet. Maybe I'd been in the command a month or two. And it just kind of helped break the ice, and our relationship just blossomed from there, because we could rib on each other equally, and nobody took it personally. I've had a couple of instances where I probably didn't act the best way. I probably came out a little too aggressive, told someone they weren't the brightest person on earth, and it set a tone for the future relationship as well, not in the most positive light. I may not have gotten something I needed from them later because we rubbed each other wrong 6 months prior. There's no way to pick out any particular one, good or bad, meeting over a course of a career, I guess, is my point. And I'd like to go back to Dennis's comment that that's why we have 2 ears and only one mouth. And it got me. I typed real quick and I looked it up. There's a quote that I always go back to in my head from the Dalai Lama. I'm kind of channeling my Jason Gerardo here with quotes from great mystics. But when you talk, you're only repeating what you already know. But if you listen, you may learn something new. So if we spend more time listening, we're going to get something out of it more than we think we know. We're going to gain something. We don't always have to say we're the smartest person in the room. We don't always have to convey information just to step on somebody to one up them. Step back out of yourself and go, I don't know this person well enough, or maybe I do know them super well, and I know that they're leaps and bounds ahead of me. I need to get something out of this because they're trying to teach me. They're trying to encourage me. They're trying to push me beyond my limits. So take some time to listen, to tone, to facial expressions, to intensity, to the underlying message that they're trying to convey to you. And that will get you a lot further than the combative, I know more than you do, don't try to one-up me, back and forth. So when Dennis posted that, it just triggered my mind, and I had to look that up real quick. Otherwise, I would have messed it up and not gotten it quite right. I think it's very important. So we have opportunities every day, personally and professionally, to convey something about ourselves. A lot of people talk about the 30-second elevator speech, doing some research on who it is you want to talk to. Maybe that elevator speech you have for one person isn't the right one for the second person. So you have to do a lot of work to know that you're communicating the right information. It cannot be just a standard boilerplate introduction every time you meet somebody. We have multiple networks that don't always interrelate the way that you do with those organizations. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. I love the quote. And also, you bring up so many points because it's the climate, the environment you're in during the conversation. We're typically talking professional, business, something around the table, but just being at a ball game with a friend is a communication. And also, who's proactive, who's initiating. Sometimes you could be sitting next to somebody for a half an hour, maybe on a plane, and no one says, hey, how you doing? Where you going? Some people don't want to, but you find that out pretty early when they pull their book out or put their earphones in, that they're closed for business for a while. And that saying, you only get one chance to make a first impression. If they're a new person, what are you communicating before you open your mouth? Like we talked about, how you dressed, how are you groomed, are you paying attention? I mean, during an interview process. And I hired a lot of people, interviewed a lot of people. I was always thinking, well, were they punctual? Did they respect my time? Did they get here a little early? Did they dress up a little bit? Did they comb their hair? Just simple things. And if someone came in late, disheveled, uninterested, well, there's not much, I already had the conversation before anybody opened their mouth.
Yeah.
Now it's how do we end this conversation and move on to the next person? The other aspect is you may only have one chance to make a first impression, but you got a second chance to make an apology. After a conversation went sour, you could say, gosh, I shouldn't have said that, and I wasn't aware, because you don't know who anybody is when you meet them. Maybe they love the Baltimore Orioles and your team just beat them. I've had people during the Super Bowl, say, hey, we just beat the Lions, not knowing I'm a great Lions fan and talking about how good of a game it is. And to me, it's like, well, I understand. And if it was somebody like the Cardinals or somebody else, I could probably care less. But it's always better, especially if you're going to say something that could be offensive to somebody, to kind of test their sensitivity, right? How do you feel about this? Well, they tell you, well, that's a good clue. I'm not going there.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, how you talk about others is how you're going to talk about the person you're with. So let's just say through a job interview, somebody would come, I hate that company I worked for 20 years. The people there were miserable. The boss was just an animal. And you're thinking, well, 20 years, was there anything good that happened that would maybe fit into the conversation? Or, how much responsibility and accountability did you have, right? Because you could talk about everybody else, but you stayed there 20 years. You put up with it, so what does that mean? You're probably there for a paycheck, and you'll probably be here for a paycheck. And not only will you badmouth somebody when you leave there, you'll probably be badmouthing them all the time you're there.
That was one of the beautiful things about the Navy was, yes, you're in the Navy for 20 years, but every 2 to 3, maybe 4 years, you're going to shift. So just as you're getting into a rhythm, oh, well, that boss really sucked. Well, he just left. Who cares?
Well, yeah, that's important. If change is on the way, it's not like suck it up forever and swallow it.
Yeah.
And then, you can take things and help yourself turn it around, right? Nothing's an absolute. If somebody's a miserable person, and again, it depends on the power situation, you wouldn't go up to a general or an admiral and talk to them the same way you talk to somebody that you're a peer with at times.
Sometimes I did.
In most cases, you just know what will happen because of something, because everybody needs each other, and there's always a helping hand at times that could make the difference. So there is a fine line between being authentic and just, kissing up to people. And everybody knows it when it's happening. Maybe not the person you're kissing up to, but it's like, oh, geez, you're so weak in a way. You didn't have to do it that way. And it's almost like you're separating yourself. Dennis says, agree, great to ask questions and listen to their feedback. That's okay. We talked about that. Harvey comes back with, I did a 30-second elevator pitch once. I messed it up. In fact, I was wrong on so many levels. That's one for you, Carrie. Yeah, but the thing is it's the once that's the key word. Yep. Because the first time you do anything, you're going to learn so much. If you've done things 1,000 times, you're not going to learn very much at all, because there's not much more, depending on the situation, that's going to be that meaningful. But laughing at yourself sometimes is a good remedy. How stupid could I be? That was like, I think when you can be your own best friend, you're bringing an ally into wherever you're going. I'll give you a quick example. The Antique Roadshow was in Denver yesterday.
Ooh.
And I've watched the show, and we had a couple things from Ann's grandmother, and I said, I'd take it in. Never been there before. I couldn't believe how many people showed up. It was an outside event, and they had tents. The sun was scorching. I didn't know it was going to be outside. I didn't bring a hat or an umbrella. Then all of a sudden we got lightning and thunder, and everybody had to move to shelters for like a half an hour until they called it off, because everything was metal poles and stuff like that. And then the lines were enormous. And then someone directed us to the wrong line. We waited in until we found out it wasn't. Then we got, but anyways, it was a comedy of errors. And the person I was with, we just had a good time, right? And there were other people complaining and swearing and all this stuff. And it's like, you got to make lemonade out of lemons sometimes. You got to just say, hey, this was an experience, something I'll never forget, even though maybe it wasn't a positive experience in what you anticipated. But I think it also says you don't have complete control over things. Yeah. All you can do is all you can do, and that's all you can do. And if you do the best you can, then you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, well, I don't know how else I could have handled that. But I learned in advance that why not bring a hat? Why not bring an umbrella? Whatever the case.
A couple of thoughts on that, Don. I mean, anytime I would get stressed out about something, it would really let it eat me up for a long time. And it really drove me down until COVID. And then I started to go through meditation and start to just breathe through these types of problems. Go, okay, it is what it is. Became a favorite, pastime to say. And I was just having this conversation with a friend last night via text, and she said, hey, I'm going through some stressful stuff, but this too shall pass. So all these negative things that we go through are teaching us something in how we respond, and that drives our communication and how we interact with people based on our mood. If we've let a negative situation drag us down with it, and you pointed out earlier, it's easier for someone to say something negative than it is to say something positive, because I don't know why the human nature wants to go down that path so much easier instead of thinking about how the situation is teaching us something. Okay, I didn't bring a hat. Okay, well, next time I bring a hat. Doing that after action review, doing that internal introspection. Okay, and my response to her was very quick, as my dad always has taught me. He's like, when things are going down a negative path, that you just don't want to be involved in something, or things aren't going your way, in the same vein of this too shall pass, is just remember the immortal words of Sir Paul and let it be. It's going to happen. Just let it be. Just go with it. If you can't change the outcome, it's going to happen the way it's going to happen. You can't change nature. In your case, lightning. Okay, I'll just move to another place until I can get back to my original path.
Yeah, I think those are quality points. And, there's a saying, and I love sayings, it's not how many times you fall down, it's how fast you get up.
Yeah.
Right? How do you recover? The best things about bad situations is they're over.
Yeah.
Right? So at least it's better to be on the other side of it than entering it. And the other thing is accountability. I could ask questions. Is it an outside event? Is it an inside event? What's the weather forecast today? I could have done a lot more to provide that instead of, well, every time I see an antique roadshow, it looks like it's in an enclosed meeting room or a large room. And first time. The other thing is get over embarrassment, because that's usually a feeling you had. Well, I went to a party and I was totally not dressed properly. I came in with a suit and tie and everybody's walking around with shorts and flowered shirts, and it's like, it's okay. You're okay. Everything will be okay. Yeah. Don't make a big thing out of nothing. And, it's also like losing twice. I had a funny story. My son, when he was growing up in high school and even a little further, loved to have poker games, right? And one night I came downstairs for a glass of water and he was just coming in. And I said, John, you don't look too good. And he said, well, I lost a lot of money. I said, well, you understand, you work for money, what it means. And he went into this whole thing. I had a flush and somebody pulled a full house and all this. John, you're losing twice. You already lost your money. Now you're spending time regretting it.
Yeah.
And if you're going to gamble, your choices are you're going to lose and you're going to win. And if you can't accept losing, you shouldn't be playing or playing for that kind of money. And I think people have to understand the past doesn't define the future.
Right.
Legacy doesn't have to be carried over. And sometimes you really got to get knocked down to get the message, right? A little bit of pain is something everybody can tolerate. But when something dramatic happens, say, I'm never going to do that again because it's just not worth it. And usually it's because it affects other people. You know, when it's just you, say, you know, went to Vegas, lost a lot of money, well, that's you and you. Come home to your wife and explain how come there's cash advances on credit cards. That's worse than losing,
Yeah.
right? So, you know, getting to the people here, Dennis says, agree harmony is so important for us to stay focused and in tune with our connections and their wisdom they're willing to share and care. So true. You know, and I think Dennis has the benefit of wisdom and experience, and things balance out. Right, the first time and it happens, it's just normal. That's to be expected. You know, sometimes you go to a hotel, they don't check you in so fast. Well, that just are getting, who I'm always happy to see here, got her MBA just a few weeks ago. I've known Christine for almost a year and a half, 2 years, and has her MBA on her LinkedIn profile. And I know how proud she is. Saw a post of hers, I think it was today, with her daughter, and her daughter was actually on the show with Christine, and just amazing how fast kids grow up. So thank you. What I find sometimes is salespeople are using internal company acronyms or product names that potential clients do not understand or follow. Great point, because some people talk over people intentionally. And usually it's an insecurity. It's
That's
not.
a good know your audience.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you communicate, to your point earlier, you may not say something offensive to somebody, but the next audience could be offensive to them. You got to know your audience and who you're talking to.
Absolutely. And, you know, even LinkedIn states that if you want to communicate on LinkedIn, communicate as a fifth grader, because everybody will understand you and people who are advanced will still understand you. But the person who keeps throwing these expensive words out, talking about how great they are, all their successes, it turns people off, because it really creates a competitive situation. And then somebody either has to say, well, if you thought that was great, let me tell you about my great situation. And then after a while, it's like competition instead of, hey, why don't you share something I found impressive about you? You can give somebody a head start because you validated them before they even said something.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, you know, they used to have that show a long time ago. It was Home Run Derby.
Yeah.
And they'd have all these great players, and they'd have somebody just throwing softballs because the idea was give them something they can hit over the fence. Well, why not give people softballs to get them going? Take a quiet person, involve them in the conversation. Hey, Jerry, talk about that fishing trip you told me about last week. And at least that's non-offensive. People are usually proud of it. And from there, they're in the mode. They're talking, they're involved. Maybe people ask questions, but also inclusion. I know Kelle says so many times when she was a CMO, she was told before the meeting, you're here to be seen and not heard. You know, and how unflattering and uninspiring is that? Then what are you paying me for, or why do you even have me here? You know, would be my question if I could ask that question. But you know, you got to walk in somebody else's shoes at times to understand what they're going through. And that's another thing. Everything's conditioned and relative to the situation. If someone just lost their dog that morning, well, that could be the reason they're frustrated or upset, or they're just not with it. And you might not be aware of it, and it appears you're insensitive. So I think that's so important. Dennis comes back. Agree the climate is so much more important than to get your thoughts up than to fall it and fail it. And then comes back with agree accountability does really count. And you know, being first to apologize helps. I know there's people who will never apologize, no matter what it is. They're never wrong. It's always somebody else's fault or you don't understand. And the easiest thing to say is, I'm sorry if for some reason I offended you. It doesn't say I intended to. It may not say I did. But if there is a semblance of, that person didn't react right. Was I overstepping myself? Wasn't I aware? You know people who have situations that nobody else knows about. And if someone starts making jokes about those situations, you know how harmful it could be. And then sometimes you got to be the intermediary. Sometimes when it's going the wrong way, you got to step in, even though it's not between you and them, to say, hey, I think we're getting a little hot here, or I think we should move the subject, or there's a lot of things you don't know. I can share it with you later, but this is not a good time.
Right.
And I think people want to see a fair, honest communication opportunity. Then they already knew before. You go into a banker, it already decides not giving you the loan, but they're still friendly, and it's like, get to it. I once had a conversation, and it was one of the conversations I'll never forget. And it was a company who was looking to acquire our company. And I had my investment banker, who was a big guy, that was on the call. And for an hour, the other person just talked about all the wonderful things we're going to do and never got to the price, never got to the terms. And after an hour said, well, here's what we're going to offer you. And we were aghast that was all there was. And you wasted an hour of your time to kind of like soften it, set us up, do whatever you wanted with it. And it was, I was a grown man, and it happened like 20 years ago. And the only thing I could think of is I left work, went to my mother's house, who couldn't help me or do anything about it. But she made some cookies, brought them out, and it was like I was 10 years old again. And I came home telling somebody hit me at school or took advantage of me. And, it just reverted back to a level where, hey, this is the place I need to be until I can cool off.
Yeah.
I think that's important. Dennis says home run derby. Sounds like it did hit it and didn't strike out. Yeah, those were the early days of TV. I don't want to date myself.
I remember watching Mickey Mantle on that. As a rerun for my sake. I remember watching Mickey Mantle on several of those episodes and reruns.
Yeah, in my day with the Tigers in Detroit was Al Kaline, Rocky Colavito, Roger Maris, Ernie Banks. All these great players. But, I think having memories that you can relate to also in situations, because this has turned out to be just like that. But instead of having an awful ending, knowing where this is going, let's either circumvent it so it doesn't ever get there, or let's make the most out of something that's not so positive. So I think, communication is part of your everyday life. How you greet somebody, how you call somebody, how long you talk. I know there's conversations that could have ended in half the time.
It's the standard meeting issue. This meeting could have been an email.
Well, that's so true. And it's usually the people who are scheduling the meeting or managing the meeting that think because they have the floor, they own the audience.
Yeah.
And how many times did you walk out mumbling to the person next to you? What a waste of time. And we do this every 2 weeks. And I just can't wait to get out of these things because my face can't smile anymore artificially.
It's 11:26. The next meeting's at 11:30. I'll give you 4 minutes back. You're not giving me anything. You just talked for 25 minutes. We didn't need to.
Well, not only that, but you look around the room, especially if it's a professional setting, and you might have 8 or 10 high-level people making good money. And let's say the average pay was $50 an hour. Well, kill an hour meeting, you just blew $500 worth of time that could have been spent doing something. And the other thing too about conversations like that, unless consensus means something, if you already decided, why bring it up knowing here's the answer instead of starting, hey, after much planning and thought and conversation, I or we decided we want to go this route. Even that's kind of ass backwards, because it's easier to say we're planning on doing this, we're having the meeting to get feedback before we initiate it. Once it's initiated, permission's done, and what you've said is you really don't matter in this subject, so why are we having a meeting about it? And people would rather know, hey, here's your place, good or bad, here's how we feel about you. But most people are afraid of scaring people off. So they keep people around much longer than they should, keep people in roles and responsibilities that don't fit anybody. And it's what's convenient and comfortable, not what's relevant, pertinent, and important that matters. Because most people would like to know why. Okay, we're going to change our hours. Why is that? Well, customers aren't coming in after 6 o'clock. There's no reason to keep the stores open. Or this and this and this and that. And it's like, hey, now that I understand, I'm willing to support it. And if I don't, go ahead, Dave.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean, I was just trying to indicate I had something to follow up. But to your point earlier about, when I mentioned the Navy, we can change and change is coming. I never accepted change for change's sake. And had a commander or a department head communicated to me what his purpose was in a change, or her purpose, that made it easier for me to accept. So many times I had folks come in and go on their first or second day of command or in positions of authority and go, we're changing this, we're changing that, because this is the way I like it. Not because it's worked, but I just don't like the way, it's not my style. Well, there's things, if you communicated to me that something was wrong or this isn't your style, it's just, we're changing it. Rubber, gavel down, we're done. And that just never made sense to me. You're just telling somebody that they didn't do something right, however long they've been doing it before. And now you're saying we're going to do it 90 degrees off. Well, why not communicate to them, look, I have my style, or I have an order from above that this has to change because they've made a change on their own. I have to accept it. Change for change's sake is not the right answer. Change for a purpose and communicate it effectively will make sure that the change, is positively taken and affected in the long term. Otherwise, it becomes a disruption to an operation, to a relationship, to whatever it is we're trying to convey and get moving on.
Oh, and I think that you make a very valid point there, is style does not always equate to substance.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah, you change something, but what difference will it make? We're going to have iced tea instead of coffee at our next meeting. Well, doesn't really matter. Doesn't change much of the dynamic of it. And the other thing is how you don't know what change will be. I know one thing, change is one of the hardest things for most people to achieve, because comfort level is based on familiarity. May not be the best thing, but it's something you're used to. And when someone says, well, now do something you're not accustomed to or you're not comfortable with, it may be the reason that now you can grow, because it's going to stretch you. It's going to make you change your thought and your activity. Plus, who is next to you and around you that's saying, hey, this is great, this is wonderful. Pretty soon you'll start thinking, maybe it is, versus, hey, this is the worst thing I ever heard of, this is terrible. And pretty soon it's going to frame your mindset before you get into it. It's like poisoning the well. And then there's people who, in situations, are political. are bureaucratic. They've figured out how to game the system, how to get the best position while everybody else is just trying to understand it. The people who talked to the boss before you did, and you were going to go in and tell your story, and now all of a sudden your story is not as important as what someone is hearing. But for every challenge, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to be the better person, to not major in the minors, to say, I always told my customer service people, if you're going to do it fast with a smile. Don't give somebody a backhanded compliment like, "Hey, you're taking advantage of the company. You don't deserve it, but we're going to give it to you." I said, at that point, don't give them anything because you already spoiled any goodwill we may have. And the other aspect is customer service is your best sales tool because it gets a chance to prove your word. If you said, "Hey, if you don't like it, bring it back. We'll give you your money back, no questions asked," and all of a sudden you get questions, and you don't want to spend 10 minutes at Costco explaining how the $8 fruit wasn't fresh enough, and you feel bad even having to go in there. And I think, you have to look at a rule of thumb. If only 10% of the time something's wrong, 90% of the time it's right. And then you got to give somebody the same grace you want for yourself is, well, and that's what I used to say in my business. Let's try it this way. If it doesn't work, we'll try it the next way. So it's not a matter of do you have a good idea, who goes first, and whatever works best goes next. And so that way it's like, oh, you took Jim again or Mary and you didn't care for me. No, we're going to do, it doesn't matter. Their pride of authorship doesn't count here. And people want to know outside the meeting how you relate to them. That's another thing. Are you phony in the meeting and then real outside the meeting? And, all those little sensitivities. And I think listening, watching, taking account of things, not making premature judgments. If it's an hour meeting, wait for the hour, just like a movie. You wouldn't judge a movie in 10 minutes, but after it's over, you can start putting things together and reasoning it out and saying, "Hey, this truly was a waste of my time." Or started out pretty slow, but it sure picked up and it was really exciting.
I can't say I've walked out of a movie 20 minutes in saying this is absolutely worthless.
And I did that myself many times. And it was hard because I was just dating my wife. We're teenagers kind of. And she was blown away. We just paid for the movie in 15 minutes. Say, let's get out of here. It's not something and people aren't used to that because people are used to, I bought a ticket, I'm going to see the end of the show, hell or high water. Harvey comes back with been such a fantastic session today, so much wisdom, great stories. I've been busy working, but have been listening and really enjoying hearing my two good friends speaking. Well, I think that's another thing, Harvey, is friendship goes a long way and goodwill has its benefit. You got to make deposits just like in the bank. Sometimes you do things and you're not going to get anything back in return. That right off the bat. Sometimes you're going to be the better person, but if you give everybody all you got, that's all you can do also. And if nothing resonates, it's time to move on. There's that saying, some will, some won't, so what? It's just a sorting process, and you're rather better off pre-qualifying or qualifying early. Always say sometimes you're better off giving a stranger $5 and never pay you back. You saved yourself one day from giving them 50, and you found out early. There was actually a company, Zappos, which is a big shoe company. Amazon bought them for a few $1 billion. And they had a policy that after 90 days, they would offer any employee $5,000 to leave. Because they just figured, hey, if they're a weak hand or a leaf in the wind, get them out of here. Why keep training them? Why keep integrating them into the chemistry or the culture when for probably a month's paycheck, they're going to get out of here? Now, that's pretty far reaching at times, but maybe you don't got to give somebody $5,000. But, the interview, I always told everybody, starts when you go to work, right? You can tell me anything in the world and I can tell you anything in the world, but when the rubber meets the road and you actually go to work here, we'll get to know who you are. You'll get to know who we are. And I think that's where trials come in, probation comes in,
Yeah.
where everybody can't say, well, I locked in, I'll be here for life. You got to earn your stripes every day. You know, that saying, what have you done for me today, is pretty valid in a conversation or communication. It's the same way. And then who do you want on your side? Right?
Yeah.
You want someone who says, hey, I don't know if you understood Don, but I've been with him for 10 years. I can tell you what type of guy he is. I can tell you what his word means. And that reinforces it. You don't want to have a sidekick who's silent when something comes up and runs away when things aren't that comfortable. And at the end of the day, a lot of times you hear things for the first time as soon as everybody else hears it. And some things surprise you. It's like, how was I so poetic? How was I so strong just now? I couldn't have planned it. It just made it happen. And then other things, like you can't unring a bell. God, how stupid was I to say that? You know, or boy, I should have held my fire for a little while longer. But that's learning, you know. And if you have the philosophy as either you're learning or earning or both, well, that's a good thing I just learned. I wasn't happy at the time. I hope it never happens again. But that lesson is strong enough.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that. I mean, I can go into a situation over the weekend where me and my wife went up to to Golden, which is only about 10 miles away. And they had some things going on. They got a lot of activities. Well, we parked in the garage and couldn't figure out how to pay the parking. It was Sunday. And, and anyways, and it said the first 2 hours are free. So we come back and we got a $50 ticket. And parking would have probably cost $4 or $5.
Yeah.
And you think to yourself, I should have done this. I should have done this. At the time, you didn't do it because you didn't think of doing it that way, you know, and after the fact, but I can guarantee, and there was parking spaces on the street. So and my wife drove and everything else, and she was far more agitated by it. And I'm like, hey, $50 is still $50, but it could have been worse. They could have towed us. They could have put a boot on us. They could have done so many things to us. I did call the next day or write and explain the situation. I don't know. You got 10 days to lobby your case. But it was, again, taking responsibility, taking accountability, and understanding the other person's side, because I'm sure there's people who try to get away without paying their parking on intent. And everything is like a continuation. I always say it's not an outcome. There are no outcomes. There's just continuums.
Yeah.
You know, this happened today. Well, it gives me a chance to change policy, direction, or just say, be humble, show some humility. I don't know what I'm doing when I did that. It was my first time. It's not an excuse. It's the way it is. And maybe I was too confident. Maybe I was too ignorant, but I learned. And, even as a parent, that is so gratifying when a child says, I screwed up so bad, Dad. And here's why. I got to tell you the whole story. And I'll never do it again.
Yep.
Right? Because that's really what you want is whatever happened, how are you going to change because of that?
I think it goes both ways. And I'll just say real briefly, I know we're coming up at the top here, but my dad and I were on an out stretch for a while. There was a point where we may not have talked ever again for all I knew. And he came to me and he said, Dave, I messed up. This is what I did. This is why we're in the relationship we're in. And I will work on changing things. And it changed the dynamic for us forever. So it goes both ways. It's how do you look up to somebody and what do you learn from somebody? The child parent relationship it goes both ways.
Absolutely. And really what you're doing is modeling,
Yeah.
right? And you feel even more impressed when someone who's really strong and proud becomes humble, says, listen, I got to come clean, you know? And even though, and once they say, even though I'm right and this and that, that takes everything away, you know?
I'm sorry, but
Yeah. But when it's clear, when it's sincere, when it's honest, and when it's out of character in a good way.
yeah.
My dad never wanted to admit he was wrong, never asked for directions, always was full speed ahead. And, as people get older, they do have that change. And I remember people in my family that were just awful to their kids, but great to their grandkids, right? Because they learned and they got more mature and they figured out, I don't got to be the tough guy. I could be the softy, and that gives people opportunity to say, well, maybe that person is different now. Why not give them a chance? And plus, how, even if it doesn't matter to you, won't change things, what will it do for them? Give them some peace of mind. So, anyways, this has been great, Dave. It always is. You're a great individual to come on a show like this with me because I get so much smarter, brings back memories, shares lessons that I paid for and maybe someone can get a premium for. So appreciate that. Appreciate everybody here today. Thank you, audience. Any last words you might have, Dave?
No, Don, to reciprocate, I appreciate every lesson I get from you every week, listening to your shows, joining our our meeting every other week for LinkedIn connections. I've gotten so much out of the last 9 to 10 months of knowing you that it's immeasurable. I just can't thank you enough.
Well, and I have to be honest and return the favor because you have evolved and become so comfortable here, so easygoing that it makes everybody in the conversation feel good about it. And that's eventually, it's not what you leave people with knowledge, it's how do they feel after being with you.
Right.
And good things and good feelings are hard to find and are easily replicated once you get that. So coming back on Monday, let me just share real quick. Monday, we've got Con and we've got Carl. Carl's actually out in Texas this week. And then on Tuesday, we've got Beverly with a brand new person, Henrietta, who you won't want to miss. She's so interesting. Grew up in Hungary, got her master's degree in Switzerland, and now working in neuroscience in New York. Dave and Jason will be our Wednesday, and Kelly and myself will be our Thursday. So again, a little bit long today, but very worthwhile. Great to see everybody, and look forward to seeing everybody Monday.